So, you want to use the bottom rack on your Weber Smokey Mountain. Don't worry, I got you. In order to get our Weber Smokey Mountain going today, I have around 3/4 of a charcoal basket completely full with B&B briquettes. I prefer briquettes on the Weber Smokey Mountain. If you guys like lump, that's completely fine. I just feel like it's a little hotter and a little more inconsistent. Now, I also have 2 of my 3 vents completely closed. This one right here is going to remain wide open in the beginning, and I'm going to light my charcoal closest to this vent. What that allows me to do is it allows me to get all of the airflow coming in right over this fire, and I feel like I can really control my Weber Smokey Mountain very well. I'm only going to use 2 chunks of wood here in a minute, and I call that my double burst method. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but let's go ahead and get the charcoal lit right here. I'm going to use my grill gun, and I'm going to focus on around, let's just say 6 to 8 briquettes. We want to light them up and then let this thing get to temp. At this point, I'm ready to put the barrel on my Weber Smokey Mountain, and now we're going to go ahead and open the door so we can let these coals get a little bit more oxygen so we can make sure we get up to temp, and then we're going to add our wood chunks here in just a second. Okay, now that I have my coals nice and hot and where I want them, I'm going to start adding my wood chunks. So I only use 2, and I'm calling this 2 because these 2 kind of make the size of this one. I like them to be around the size of my fist, and I'm going to put 1 chunk directly over the hot coals and then my other chunk right in the middle. So my goal is to burn this fire from this starting point outward to the middle and then out to the rest of the coals. So that's why I call it my double burst method, because you get that burst of smoke in the beginning and then you get that continuous burst throughout the whole cook. Now we have the wood chunks set up on the Weber Smokey Mountain. We want to show you how to use 2 racks on your Weber Smokey Mountain. A few videos back, somebody asked me if we could make a video on this, so here it is. We're going to be cooking multiple different proteins. We don't necessarily have a menu, but we want to show you how we set up our Weber Smokey Mountain when we're using both of the cooking racks. So you guys can see that I have both of my Weber Smokey Mountain grates on today. I usually have the diffuser plate right where this second one is, but today we're not using that, and I also do not use the water pan. I prefer to apply spritz if I want, and that's how I get my moisture in my meat here. So what I'm going to do just to make this a little easier is I'm actually going to take this probe out, and that's going to make it a lot easier for me to remove this grate because we are going to need to get to the one under. So what we're going to do is we are going to be smoking some pork ribs, and I'm also going to be smoking a tri-tip. Why I like to use 2 zones even in my Weber Smokey Mountain is so I could put that tri-tip on the bottom a little bit further away from the direct coals. I do want to get a nice smoke flavor on there, and I'll show you guys exactly how I'm going to put that here in a minute. I will put the pork ribs on this side of the rack so none of the drippings are going directly over the tri-tip, and we're still getting that nice smoky flavor from the drippings. So we'll start with a rack of St. Louis style spare ribs, and the only thing I'm going to do here is I am going to pull the membrane on the back, and I'll just kind of trim off a little bit of this excess meat. We're cooking in the backyard today, so we're not too worried about trimming these or anything like that. I do prefer to pull the membrane. I've tried it without, and I've tried scoring it, and I do prefer it, so that's what we're going to do today. Just going to trim a little bit of this flap here off. There actually is a lot of fat here, so I am going to get some of these larger pieces out. That was just right under the membrane. I really couldn't see it before. And that right there looks good enough for me. Now I'll start on the backside with a little bit of mustard as a binder. And today we're going to be using Postal Barbecue's The Original Rub. This is a great rub. It has nice citrus flavors to it. Really, really balanced, sweet, and savory rub. I'm just going to go ahead and put a decent layer on the backside. I always start on the backside because the top is my presentation, and I do want to make sure that it looks as pretty as possible. Another thing I always do is I like to make sure that I don't see any yellow after I've seasoned. That makes me know that I have a well enough coat on my ribs or any protein that I'm cooking that I got that binder covered. So I'm just going to go ahead and pat this in real quick. We'll flip it over and do the same exact thing on the top side. Nice layer of The Original Rub by Postal Barbecue. Has a great color on there as well. And now we'll let these set outside for around 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll throw them on the Weber Smokey Mountain. Now we're going to go ahead and put our pork ribs right on the Weber Smokey Mountain. Want to make sure to kind of Get them straight. They are going to cook the way I put them on here, and I do want them to look nice and pretty. We talk about that all the time. So now that the ribs are on the Weber Smokey Mountain, I like to start thinking about what I'm cooking and the timing of everything coming off around the same time. So I'm cooking pork ribs and a tri-tip today. If you guys are cooking pork butt and a brisket, you need to think about those things. How long is it going to take you to cook those, and do you want them to be ready at the same time? Today we're going to eat this for dinner, so I do want the ribs and the tri-tip to be done around the same amount of time. The tri-tip should take no longer than an hour and a half, and these ribs are going to take no longer than 5 to 5.5 hours. That's because I like to cook them around 4 to 4.5 and let them rest for an hour. So just think about those things when you're using these two racks. Also, the bottom rack is a lot closer to the fire, so anything you put down there is going to cook significantly faster. We're going to go ahead and let these ribs cook for around an hour. We'll check on them, look at the color, see if we need a spritz, and then we'll just adjust throughout the rest of the cook. After right at an hour on our pork ribs, you can see that they're looking really good. The color here is amazing. I love the color that we're getting from that original rub by Postal Barbecue. Now, the pit is rocking right at 275. It's perfect. I'm seeing a few spots here that look a little bit dry. So I am going to go ahead and hit them with just a tad bit of water. I prefer to use water only if I want to add any flavors. Most of the time I'm adding it into my wrap, or we can do a little bit of simple syrup in the end. But for now, I just want to keep these moist. If I notice that my spritz kind of took away some of the seasoning where it wasn't so dry, I can reapply if I need to. But right now, these are looking perfect. So we're going to continue this process here for just another hour or so, and then we'll come back when it's time to wrap. It's been right at 2 hours on our pork ribs, so now we're going to take them off and wrap them up. We're going to start prepping up for that tri-tip cook and using that second rack on our Weber Smokey Mountain. The ribs are looking really nice. The color on them is perfect. Now that we're going to wrap these up, we're going to keep them over the side that has the charcoal on there. If you guys wanted to, you could put them wherever you want at this point. So because we're going to put that tri-tip on the bottom on the opposite side of the coals, I do want to make sure that I don't drop any of the stuff we're going to wrap in this foil on top of it. So I am going to keep them separate. In our rib wrap today, we're going to be using some of this sugar in the raw. It's just liquid cane sugar. I really like it because I like the texture that I get on the ribs as opposed to the brown sugar. Also, I've been wrapping my ribs meat side up, and I also really like the way that turns out as well. I've found that whenever I put the meat side down, I lose a lot of the texture that I gained on my ribs when I kind of built that bark. So we're going to put some of the liquid cane sugar, and then I'm going to put 4 pads of butter here. Now I'm just going to go ahead and wrap these up. And this will go right back into the Weber Smokey Mountain. We won't check these for another hour and a half. Now that we have the ribs back on the Weber Smokey Mountain, it's time to start utilizing this bottom rack, and we're gonna get our tri-tip ready. So the great thing about setting up the Weber Smokey Mountain the way that I do is you have zones. Even though this is a smoker, you still have your zones. And because we're on that bottom rack, we're a lot closer to the coal, so you could cook something hotter, you could cook it faster, you could get more texture. Whereas if you were to smoke the tri-tip on the top rack, you might not be able to get as much texture. Let's go ahead and trim this up. We'll season it up, and then we're going to put it on the Weber Smokey Mountain, and we'll start talking about exactly how we're going to cook this. So just a few things that I want to do on the top of this tri-tip is I want to start taking some of this hard fat off of here. I want to make sure that every single bite that I get with this tri-tip is as flavorful as possible, and we don't get a hard chunk of fat. I want to make sure to get off as much of this fat as I can without going too deep into the meat here. One of the other things that I want to keep note of is this grain. So the grain on the tri-tip actually turns 2 different directions, and I do want to make sure in the end when I'm slicing this, I'm getting that super tender bite. So I want to make sure that I see the grains running this way right here, and then it actually turns and it's running the complete opposite direction. So when I'm looking at my piece of meat, I like to keep those things in mind, because in the end, it's not always easy to see the grain once it's completely cooked and you have bark on there. So just something to think about. We have a little bit of silver skin in the back that I want to take off here. So that looks great for the top. I'm just going to go ahead and flip over, and now I want to focus on this fat cap. So I like to keep most of this fat cap, but while feeling here, I'm noticing that some of this fat is pretty hard. So I'm just going to take it down a little bit, almost kind of like a brisket. Try and leave 1/4 of an inch or so of fat. And the reason I like to do this is because it protects the top side of this tri-tip, and it's really, really hard to overcook it if you keep this fat cap. It just protects it really, really well. And in the end, if I want to, I can cut this fat cap away, no problem. You can also see there's a lot of silver skin here, so that doesn't always break down the best. So I'm just getting a little bit of it off. So not too much more is needed, but I definitely want to keep feeling. If I feel anything hard in there, I'm trying to take it off. Tri-tip is looking pretty good all over now, so it's time to season this thing up. I'm going to start with a little bit of Frank's hot sauce as a binder. I've never been able to taste this when I use it as a binder, and every so often I will use it on my beef. For our beef rub today, we're going to be using Southern Belle. This was designed specifically for beef, has some great pepper granules in there, and an overall great flavor that complements any single piece of beef that you're going to use. Let's see if I can get a good even coating here. It's windy outside, and it's hard to season out here sometimes. We're going to do the same exact thing to this top side here. Try and use all of the seasoning that you have left over on the board. And the next step is to put our tri-tip on the bottom rack. So this is where it gets tricky. I'm grabbing the top rack. I have some hot gloves here. These are good up to 700 degrees. So I'm going to grab this and put it aside. Then I'm going to put our tri-tip fat side down, and you can hear that sizzle. So this bottom rack is significantly hotter than this top one. I'm going to grab our top rack and put it right back exactly the way it was. So this is what I was talking about earlier. If you had meat here that wasn't wrapped up, it wouldn't be dripping over top of our tri-tip right now. We're going to let it go like this for a little bit. We're going to add some poppers in a little bit. We have some other meats that we're going to put on, and we'll just kind of adjust these racks as we need throughout the cook. It's been right around 30 minutes since we put the tri-tip on the smoker, and you can see that there's a lot more smoke that's coming up from this Weber Smokey Mountain. And that's because those fat drippings are hitting those coals, and that's what causes there to be so much flavor when you're using something like this or something like a drum. So now we're going to put on some sausage. I want to load this thing up today for dinner and to show you guys just how to manipulate things if you're using both racks. So the first thing that I want to do here is I want to take my lid off and I want to rotate this top rack. The reason I want to do that is because when we put this sausage on here, it will not drip over the tri-tip that we're cooking. I almost had a bad accident there. I put it under the knob, but let's go ahead and grab this sausage. So this is some really unique and amazing sausage because John over at the Chopping Block in Victoria actually put this together. It has beef, it has pork, and it's seasoned with Southern hospitality. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this right over the smoker. So one of the things that you'll notice here is when I'm putting this sausage on, you're not really hearing that sizzle anymore. And that's because we put this on the opposite side of the coals and we're on the top rack. So again, keep that in mind. The versatility that you get when you're actually using the two racks and you have your two zones. It's been about an hour on our pork ribs. So let's take them off, see if they're done, and we can get that 1 hour rest. And just by feeling them in the wrap, they felt really good. So let's just kind of look and feel. Oh yeah, these are definitely done. I can just tell by the way they feel here. You can see on this side, let me turn this around real fast. You can see on this side that we got the nice pull back here. That just means that the meat is pulling back from the bone. So you see those beautiful bones exposed there. And like I said, the feel on these is incredible. So I'm not even going to temp. I just know these are done. And they typically take me around 3 hours at 275 degrees to cook my ribs. So keep that in mind. I know a lot of people like to cook them a little bit longer, but these to me are really going to turn out perfectly. So now I'm going to wrap these back up. I'm going to put them in my Cambro, and they're going to rest for 1 hour until it's time to eat. All right, it's been 30 minutes since we put our ribs in the Cambro to rest. So now I'm going to take this top rack off, and I want to check this tri-tip to see what the internal temp is looking like. So you can see right there in the deepest part of it, it's sitting right at 129, which is perfect. So I'm just going to do this real fast. I'm going to turn it over just to get a little bit of color there. Like I talked to you guys about earlier, that fat really protects it. You can see that it's still going to be super tender, super juicy. I want there to be just a little bit of color on the top. We're going to pull this off in about 5 minutes. While we're waiting for this to sear, we're going to go ahead and put some poppers on the top grate. And about 5 minutes later, I guarantee you we got a good sear on that tri-tip. I'm taking off the top rack, and let's take a look at our tri-tip. Looks delicious here. I know the lighting isn't that great because of the sun and then there's shadows and stuff like that, but man, this looks and feels super delicious. Now we're gonna go back on with the top rack. We'll check the sausage in a minute and we're just gonna let these poppers cook. We cooked 4 things over the span of 5.5 hours on the Weber Smokey Mountain, and everything turned out absolutely perfect. I've told you guys so many times that this, in my opinion, is the most versatile smoker for the price. If you guys looked at the B-roll, the sexy shots of us cutting open the ribs, the tri-tip, everything came out absolutely perfect. We utilized both racks. The bottom one was for a little bit hotter and a little bit faster of cooking, but we still got that perfect medium rare on our tri-tip. The top we used to smoke some ribs, and they came out absolutely delicious. I have 0 complaints with the way that these bad boys look. Let's go ahead and take a bite of some of the items that we made today. I may not try them all because we're about to sit down and have dinner, but I'll tell you one thing I'm for sure gonna try is one of these delicious looking ribs. Look at that bite. Just absolutely incredible. Again, the fact that we can do this and turn around and make a beautiful looking tri-tip is just absolutely incredible. The sausage is good. I already know. I had some yesterday. Poppers are poppers. And man, oh man. You guys got to try this out. If you're interested in trying out your Weber Smokey Mountain using both of your racks, try these techniques that we used today. Anyway, I'm going to go eat the rest of this stuff. As always, we really appreciate you guys tuning into this video. Thanks. Perfection. We'll see you on the next one. It wasn't a fluke.